Imagine being forced to room with someone you can't stand. A guy who's loud, confident, and everything you try to avoid. That's Malik, my college roommate for a trip to Egypt. But what happened one night while I was asleep? Something that completely changed everything. He touched me, gently, deliberately, and I didn't stop him. The moment it happened, I had no idea how it would shift, not just how I saw him, but how I saw myself. Curious yet? Keep listening, because this story is about to get a whole lot deeper. When I found out I was rooming with Malik for our college trip to Egypt, I'll be honest, I didn't exactly jump for joy. The idea of spending an entire week with him, a guy who was loud, athletic, and the life of every party, felt like a nightmare. He was the kind of person who didn't just walk into a room, he owned it, and me. I'm the quiet type, the one who sits in the back, keeps to himself, and tries not to rock the boat. Malik was everything I tried to avoid, and yet, there I was, stuck with him for the trip of a lifetime. We arrived at the hostel in Cairo, a small room with twin beds, a desk, and a view that honestly could have been straight out of a postcard. The streets below buzzed with the sounds of life, voices calling, the call to prayer echoing through the air, and the scent of spice and sand that hung in the warm evening air. It should have been peaceful. I should have been amazed by the view, caught up in the history surrounding me. But all I could think about was how I was going to survive a week in this tiny room with Malik. The second we dropped our bags, Malik flopped onto his bed like he owned the place, that same cocky smile plastered on his face. He glanced over at me, and I could practically hear his smirk in the air. "So, are we doing the silent treatment for the week, or can we try to be civil?" he asked, his voice dripping with that charm he didn't even have to try for. I didn't respond right away. Honestly, I wasn't sure what to say. He was the kind of guy who never took anything seriously, who breezed through life with this effortless confidence, and I was the kind of guy who overthought everything. But I knew one thing for sure. I didn't want to deal with him. Not like this. Not in a room where I couldn't escape. So, I shrugged and mumbled, "Let's just get through this without killing each other." He laughed like I'd said something funny, then settled back into his bed, stretching his arms behind his head. And there it was again, those muscles, the way his shirt rode up as he relaxed, the effortless way he owned every space he was in. It wasn't just annoying, it was infuriating. I couldn't deny it. Malik was attractive, and that made me even more uncomfortable. I hated how effortlessly he drew attention, how people gravitated toward him without even trying. As for me, I was the quiet one, the one who never raised his voice, who got praised for essays, not for making a scene or drawing attention. In a room full of people, I was the one who blended in, who kept to the edges. Malik, though, he was the center of every conversation, every group, every joke. He was everything I wasn't. And yet, I couldn't completely avoid him. I mean, there were moments when I caught myself watching him, not in an obvious way, but when he wasn't looking, I'd catch him out of the corner of my eye. His charisma, the way he moved, the way people just liked him, it started to get to me, more than I'd like to admit. But I kept my guard up. I had to. People like Malik didn't pay attention to people like me unless there was a punchline or a bet involved. And despite everything, I still didn't trust it. I couldn't. The first few days passed in a blur of heat, sand, and ancient wonders. We hiked through the dunes, visited the pyramids of Giza, walked through crowded Cairo streets, and marveled at the history that surrounded us. I tried to keep my distance, but Malik, for some reason, kept showing up. He cracked jokes, charmed the locals, and dropped random knowledge about Egypt like he had a PhD in it. And to my horror, I started to realize that he wasn't just an entertainer, he was actually smart. Sharp, thoughtful even. It wasn't just his charisma anymore. Malik had layers, and it made me question everything I thought I knew about him. But still, I kept my distance. Sure, he was neat, he didn't snore, and he even brought back snacks without me asking. But I stayed cautious, because people like Malik, they didn't just befriend people like me. They didn't see me as anything more than a quiet guy who kept to the background. But Malik, he kept looking at me. Not in a way that screamed interest, but enough for me to notice. It wasn't obvious, but sometimes I'd catch him glancing at me, and it made my stomach flip. By the third night, exhaustion had caught up to me. The physical strain of the trip, the constant movement, the heat of the day, it all hit me like a brick wall. I hadn't slept well since the flight, and by the time we were back in the room, I was spent. After a quick cold shower, I collapsed into bed, facing the wall, hoping for sleep. Malik was still awake, scrolling on his phone, his soft laughter breaking the silence occasionally. I kept my back to him, tried to focus on sleep, but the exhaustion only made it harder. And that's when it happened. The thing that would change everything. It was so subtle, so quiet, that I wasn't sure if it was real at first. But when I felt Malik's touch, when his fingers brushed against my arm, everything inside me froze. It was gentle, deliberate, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't move. I didn't pull away. I stayed still, my heart pounding in my chest, unsure of what to do, unsure of what it meant. That touch, in the dark, left me feeling like I was standing on the edge of something I didn't know how to navigate. And as Malik shifted back into his bed, I stayed awake long after he'd settled, trying to understand what had just happened, what he had just done. The next morning, he acted like nothing happened. No awkwardness, no acknowledgement, just casual as ever, like it was nothing. But I knew it was far from nothing, and I couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning of something much bigger than I had ever anticipated. After that night, everything changed, but it didn't happen all at once. There was no sudden revelation or grand moment that shifted things. No, it was the small things, the subtle moments that I began to notice, moments that at first didn't make sense. But looking back, I realized those small changes were the start of everything. Malik didn't act like anything was different the next morning. He went about his usual routine, laughing, joking with everyone, his usual effortless charm that seemed to draw people in without even trying. But underneath it all, I couldn't stop thinking about what happened. That touch, that fleeting moment when his fingers brushed against my arm. It kept replaying in my mind over and over again. I tried to ignore it. I tried to focus on the sights around me. Cairo, the pyramids, the Valley of the Kings. But no matter where I was or what I was doing, Malik's presence was there. Not in an overwhelming way, but just enough to make me notice him, just enough to make me question what was happening between us. It was the small things, like when we were walking through the ruins, and Malik would slow down just enough to walk beside me. At first, it seemed like nothing, but I began to notice how he'd ask me questions about the history of the place, things no one else seemed to care about, things that made me think he was paying more attention to me than I'd given him credit for. The way his eyes lingered just a moment longer than necessary when we'd exchange a glance. And the way he started to ask about my thoughts on the trip, on Egypt, on life in general. It was subtle, but I could see it now. Malik wasn't just this loud, charming guy who wanted to make everyone laugh. He was someone who genuinely wanted to understand, to connect. There was a depth to him that I hadn't expected, and honestly, it unnerved me. It made me question everything I thought I knew about him. One night, after another long day of exploring and absorbing everything this ancient place had to offer, we got back to the hostel, and I was exhausted, physically drained, mentally tired. I collapsed onto my bed, my mind still racing, trying to make sense of everything. Malik came in shortly after, his usual energy now quieted by the exhaustion we'd both shared during the day. He tossed a bag of snacks onto the desk and looked over at me. "You good?" he asked, his voice surprisingly soft. I gave him a quick thumbs up, too tired to say much. I was exhausted, physically, emotionally, but his words hung in the air, still buzzing around my mind. It wasn't just small talk. It wasn't the usual joke or lighthearted remark. There was something deeper in it, something unspoken, almost like he was trying to get me to open up, to let him in. I didn't answer right away. I just buried my face in my pillow, trying to shut off my thoughts for a while. But his voice broke through again. "You really don't talk much, do you?" It wasn't an accusation. It wasn't meant to make me feel bad. It was almost like he was genuinely curious. And that's when I realized something. Malik, The guy I'd been avoiding for the last few days. The guy I thought was just a joke waiting to happen, actually saw me. He was seeing through all the walls I had carefully built around myself. And maybe, just maybe, he was the first person to actually ask me why I kept them up. I didn't answer him right away. I just rolled over to look at him, our eyes meeting in the dim light of the room. Malik was staring at the ceiling now, but there was a softness in his gaze I hadn't noticed before. He wasn't smirking, wasn't acting like the cocky guy he usually did. Instead, he was thinking about me, about us. "You ever think maybe you're more interesting than you let yourself be?" he said quietly, almost to himself. And for a moment, the world outside our small hostel room disappeared. It was just me, him, and that question. I wasn't sure how to respond. I wasn't sure what he meant or how to answer. But there it was. Something shifted in that moment. Malik wasn't just trying to make me laugh or get me to engage. He was actually listening, paying attention to things I didn't even realize about myself. And that made me uncomfortable, not in a bad way, but in a way that made me confront things I wasn't ready to face. There was an awkward silence that followed, one where I tried to avoid his gaze. But I could feel him watching me. I could feel the weight of his attention, and it wasn't judgment, it wasn't criticism. It was genuine curiosity. The night carried on like that, with us both in silence, but it was a different kind of silence now. It wasn't the silence I'd grown used to, the one that made me feel invisible, the one I'd built my walls around. This silence was different. It was open, inviting. There was a strange comfort in it, and in a way, it felt like I was slowly being pulled into something I wasn't ready to understand. But that night, I couldn't escape the pull. As I lay in bed, trying to shake off the thoughts swirling in my mind, I couldn't ignore the way my body felt whenever Malik was around. It wasn't just physical attraction, it was something deeper. A connection, maybe. A connection I wasn't sure I wanted to explore, but a connection that was growing stronger with each passing day. By the time we settled into bed that night, I knew one thing for sure. Malik was no longer just the guy I was stuck with. He was someone who had managed to break through my walls in ways I hadn't expected. And despite all the confusion, despite the fear of what this meant, I couldn't help but feel something shift in me, something that told me this wasn't the end of the story, it was just the beginning. And as the night grew quieter, I couldn't help but wonder, was I ready to let myself feel what I was starting to feel? Was I ready to stop fighting what was happening between us? That, I didn't know. But what I did know was that this, whatever it was, had just begun, and it was only a matter of time before I would have to face it. The morning after, I woke up to the usual sounds of the hostel, distant chatter, the rustle of sheets, the occasional clink of a mug being placed down somewhere in the hallway. But it felt different. The air felt heavier, more charged. I wasn't sure why, but everything seemed to have shifted in a way I couldn't quite put into words. Malik, though, he was acting like everything was normal, like last night hadn't happened. There was no awkwardness, no change in the way he spoke to me. He was just Malik, loud, carefree, cracking jokes with the guys in the back of the room, tossing snacks around, his signature smile plastered across his face as if the events of the night before had disappeared into thin air. But I knew better. It hadn't disappeared. It couldn't have. The touch. The way his fingers had brushed against my arm. The way I had stayed still, not out of fear, but because something inside me didn't want him to stop. That wasn't just a fleeting moment. It wasn't nothing. I felt it, deep down in a place I wasn't ready to acknowledge. But I knew that what had happened was something real. I couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed between us. And yet, I found myself unsure of what to do with that change. Did he feel it too? Was it just me? And if it was just me, how would I ever know for sure? He was pretending it never happened. He was acting like his usual self, as if the night hadn't left a mark on either of us. And maybe, just maybe, that was the most confusing part. The silence between us started to weigh on me. Every time I looked at him, I felt like there was something unsaid between us, something hanging in the air, a quiet tension I didn't know how to address. We spent the rest of the morning getting ready for the day's activities, and while everything looked the same on the surface, laughing, joking with the group, the same casual banter, I couldn't escape the undercurrent of what had passed between us. It was there, lingering, and I couldn't ignore it. On the bus ride to the next destination, I kept my gaze out the window, trying to push aside the questions swirling in my mind. I didn't want to be the one to bring it up. I didn't know what I would even say if I did. But Malik? He noticed. I knew he did. It was impossible not to. At one point, he leaned over, just enough so that only I could hear him. "You're awfully quiet today," he said, his voice softer than usual, a hint of something I couldn't place. Maybe it was concern, or curiosity. Maybe he was testing the waters. I looked at him, trying to mask the confusion in my eyes. "Just tired," I said, keeping my tone neutral, not wanting to give anything away. But he didn't let it go that easily. He tilted his head slightly, studying me for a moment longer than usual. The moment stretched, and I felt the weight of his gaze on me, but I didn't know how to react. Was he asking me if I was okay, or was he asking if I knew? Did he know that I felt the same pull? I wasn't sure. I wasn't sure about any of it. "Yeah," he said, leaning back. "I get it." But there was something in his eyes, something that made me think he wasn't talking about being tired anymore. It was almost like he knew exactly what I was thinking, exactly what I was feeling, but nothing more was said. It was like the conversation had ended before it even began. The bus ride continued in silence, and I couldn't shake the feeling that Malik was pulling away just as much as I was, not in a physical sense, but emotionally. I could feel the distance growing between us, and I didn't know how to close it. Later that day, during a tour of the Valley of the Kings, I couldn't concentrate. The ancient tombs, the towering stone structures, the vibrant colors that had somehow survived thousands of years, all of it should have been awe-inspiring. But my mind was stuck on what had happened the night before, on Malik's touch, his hand, his eyes. I couldn't stop replaying it in my head, and it was like the more I thought about it, the more everything else became a blur. Malik was close again, but not too close. I could feel him there, just enough for me to notice. He asked questions about the tombs, about the hieroglyphs, and it was clear that he had done his research, that he was genuinely interested. But the questions, the way he leaned just a little closer to me when he asked them, it wasn't just about the history anymore. It was like he was trying to understand something more, something about me. At one point, he casually bumped his shoulder against mine, just like he had before, but this time it felt different. It wasn't playful, it wasn't teasing. It was just there. And I couldn't help but notice how his hand brushed mine when we reached for a water bottle. It wasn't accidental. I knew it wasn't accidental, but what did it mean? Why was he doing this? Why was he being so careful? The day passed in a blur. We toured more sites, walked through ancient corridors, and marveled at the world's history, but my mind kept drifting back to Malik. I tried to focus, I really did. But every little touch, every glance, every moment we shared felt like it was building towards something that I wasn't ready to face. By the time we got back to the hotel, I was physically drained, but my mind was still racing. I needed a break. I needed quiet. I needed to breathe, but I couldn't escape the weight of the silence between us. That night, I found myself lying on my bed, face down, staring into the pillow, just hoping for a moment of peace. But Malik came in shortly after, his usual energy still hanging in the room, but now it was different. He didn't make any jokes. He didn't toss a snack onto the desk or laugh like he usually did. He just sat there, quietly, as if he was waiting for something. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice soft. I didn't know how to answer. I didn't know what I was feeling anymore. I didn't know what to say to him, to myself. So I just nodded, a small gesture that I hoped would communicate everything I was feeling without having to say it out loud. But Malik didn't press. He didn't push for more. Instead, he simply said, "If you ever want to talk, I'm here." And with that, he left the room, and I was left alone with my thoughts. I was still wrestling with everything. I was still scared. Scared of what this connection meant, scared of what it could become. But what scared me the most was that, for the first time, I wasn't sure I wanted to fight it. I didn't know what the next step was, but something inside me told me that Malik was starting to crack the walls I'd built up around myself. And that was both terrifying and somehow relieving. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't sure where this would go. But maybe, just maybe, I was ready to find out. It's funny how the truth has a way of creeping up on you, of quietly building up over time until it can no longer be ignored. I had spent the last few days battling with my own thoughts, my own feelings about Malik. It wasn't just his charm or his easy confidence. It was something deeper. Something that had started to unravel within me the moment he first touched me in the dark, the moment I let him get close. I was afraid of what that meant, afraid of the connection growing between us. But it was inescapable. It was happening whether I was ready for it or not. That night, as I sat on my bed, staring at the ceiling, it felt like everything that had been building up between us was about to break open. I knew it. Malik had been quieter than usual, not cracking jokes or showing off. There was a change in him too, something softer, more vulnerable. And when I caught him glancing at me out of the corner of my eye, I realized he was just as unsure about all of this as I was. Maybe more so. But there was something else in the way he looked at me. It wasn't the usual teasing smirk. It wasn't the playful banter. No, this was different. This was real. This was the kind of look that made my heart beat faster, that made everything inside me freeze for just a second. It wasn't long before he spoke. His voice was softer than usual, like he was testing the waters, unsure of how I would respond. "Hey," Malik said, breaking the silence that had hung heavy between us. "I need to talk to you about something." My stomach twisted. The way he said it, the way his tone had shifted, told me this was going to be different. I had no idea what he was about to say, but I had a feeling I wasn't ready to hear it. Not yet. I sat up a little straighter on the bed, trying to keep my composure, trying to act like I wasn't as nervous as I felt. I kept my gaze on him, trying to read his expression, but there was something guarded about him now, a seriousness that was new. "I've been thinking a lot about the last few days," he continued, his voice barely above a whisper. "And I think I need to tell you something." I swallowed, unsure of how to respond. I didn't know if I wanted to hear it. My heart was pounding in my chest, and I could feel the words he was about to say hanging in the air between us like an unspoken truth. He shifted, sitting up straighter on his bed, his eyes now locked with mine. "I don't know how to say this," he admitted, rubbing the back of his neck nervously. "But I think I've started to care about you, more than just the usual, the jokes, the teasing. It's more than that, it's real. And I think I'm starting to feel something for you." His words hit me like a wave. I didn't know how to process them, how to react. I wanted to say something, to respond, but my mind was spinning. I had been avoiding this, avoiding the reality of what was happening between us. But hearing him say it out loud, it made it real. It made everything real. "I didn't mean for it to happen this way," he continued, his voice a little more vulnerable now. "But I think you should know, I don't want to hide this anymore. I'm not asking for anything. I'm not expecting anything. I just wanted you to know." I sat there in stunned silence, trying to digest what he had just said. Malik, the guy who was always the center of attention, the guy who never seemed to take anything seriously, had just opened up to me in a way I didn't expect. And what he said, it wasn't just some passing comment, it wasn't a joke, it was a confession. A real, raw confession. And in that moment, everything shifted. I wasn't just hearing his words, I was feeling them. For the first time, I felt like Malik wasn't just the guy I had been avoiding. He was someone who had seen me, really seen me, in a way no one else had. And as his words sunk in, I realized something else. I had been feeling the same way. I had been fighting it, pushing it down, but deep down, I knew. I cared about him too. I wasn't sure what that meant or where it would lead, but I couldn't deny it any longer. The way he had touched me, the way he had been there for me without asking for anything in return, it all made sense now. It wasn't just about the attraction, about the way he looked or the way he made people laugh. It was about the connection that had grown between us, without either of us really understanding it. I didn't say anything at first. I couldn't. I wasn't sure what to say. The words felt like they were stuck in my throat, but when I finally found my voice, I looked at him and said, "I don't know what to say." Malik's face softened, like he was afraid of what I might say next, but he didn't push. He didn't make it uncomfortable. He just waited, and in that moment I realized how much I had been holding back, how much I had been afraid of opening up, of allowing myself to feel something for him. And then, without even thinking, I reached out. I wasn't sure what I was doing, but I knew I didn't want to leave this moment unresolved. I didn't want to keep pretending that everything was fine when we both knew it wasn't. So I reached out, my hand brushing against his, and just like that, everything changed. For the first time, Malik didn't pull away. He didn't laugh it off. He didn't make a joke. He just held my hand, and we sat there together, silently, letting the weight of everything sink in. "Maybe we don't have to figure it out right now," Malik said, his voice steady now, like he had come to a realization of his own. "Maybe we just need to let things happen, let them unfold, but I needed you to know." And for the first time, I felt a sense of peace. It wasn't perfect, and I didn't have all the answers, but I knew one thing. This moment, this confession, was the beginning of something new, something real. There was no rush, no expectations, just a quiet understanding that whatever happened next, we'd face it together. And that was enough. It was more than enough. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid of what might come. I wasn't afraid to feel, to explore, to open myself up to something I had been too scared to admit. I didn't know what the future held, but in that moment, I realized that maybe, just maybe, it was worth finding out. After Malik's confession, things felt different. Not in a dramatic, world-shifting kind of way, but in a way that made everything quieter, more intimate. We weren't rushing into anything. There were no grand gestures, no declarations or promises. But there was something unspoken between us now, a quiet understanding that made the space between us feel more real. The kind of connection that you can't quite put into words, but you feel it, deeply, in a way that's impossible to ignore. In the days that followed, we settled into a new rhythm. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't always easy, but it was real. There were moments when I caught myself noticing Malik more than usual. The way he laughed, the way his eyes softened when he wasn't trying to charm the room. He wasn't just the loud, confident guy I had once dismissed. He was more than that. And, in a strange way, I was starting to see parts of him I hadn't noticed before. It was small things at first, like when we'd walk through the crowded streets of Cairo and Malik would slow down, just a little, to match my pace. Or the way he'd ask about my thoughts on the day's tour, about the ancient temples and the history we were surrounded by. At first, it felt like just casual conversation. But I started to realize that there was something more to it. He wasn't just asking for the sake of small talk. He genuinely wanted to know what I thought. He was listening, really listening, and that somehow meant more to me than anything else. I found myself opening up in ways I hadn't expected. I wasn't used to letting people in, especially not in the way Malik was. But with him it felt different. There was no pressure. No expectation, just an invitation to be myself, to be real. And little by little, I started to let my guard down. It wasn't always easy, though. There were still moments of hesitation, moments when I questioned whether I was doing the right thing. Was I really ready for this? Was I ready to admit that I was feeling something for him? But every time I caught his gaze, every time our hands brushed when we passed the water bottles, or when he leaned a little closer while asking me about something, I knew. I knew that this was something I wasn't ready to walk away from. One night, as we sat on our beds, scrolling through our phones in silence, I could feel the weight of everything unsaid between us, but this time the silence didn't feel heavy. It didn't feel uncomfortable, it felt comfortable, easy. As if we were both okay with the quiet, with just being there, together. After a while, Malik turned to me and spoke in that quiet tone that seemed to be reserved just for these moments. "You know," he said softly, "I've been thinking a lot about this trip. About everything that's happened so far." I looked over at him, waiting for him to continue. There was something in the way he spoke, something more serious, but not urgent, not desperate. Just real. "And what have you been thinking about?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He paused for a second, his gaze steady as he looked at me. "I don't know, just how easy this feels. How easy it feels to be around you." And I guess I didn't expect that. His words hit me in a way I wasn't prepared for. Because honestly, I didn't expect it either. I didn't expect to feel this way. I didn't expect to feel this seen in a way that was so different from how I had always felt in the past. "I didn't expect it either," I said, my voice quiet but steady. And that was the truth. I hadn't expected any of this. I hadn't expected to feel so comfortable, so accepted around him. And yet, here we were, navigating this strange new space that neither of us fully understood. But maybe that was the beauty of it. We didn't need to understand everything all at once. We didn't need to have it all figured out. We were just being. And for the first time, I realized that was enough. As the days passed, the connection between us continued to grow, slowly, almost imperceptibly. There were no big moments, no grand declarations, but there were quiet, shared glances, moments where our shoulders brushed and our hands touched more often than they had before. Every little touch felt like a promise, like a step forward into something neither of us fully understood, but were willing to explore. There was a quiet intimacy in those moments, something that didn't need to be spoken aloud to be understood. When we sat together during the tours, when we ate meals in silence, when we laughed at nothing in particular. It wasn't the loud, over-the-top kind of connection I had once thought I wanted. It was quiet. It was subtle, but it was real, and that made all the difference. One afternoon, while walking through a bustling market in Cairo, I caught Malik looking at me out of the corner of his eye. There was no smirk on his face this time, no playful teasing. Just a soft, genuine look that made my heart skip a beat. It wasn't anything big. It wasn't a grand romantic gesture. But in that moment, I felt something shift. It was as if we had reached a new level of understanding, a new level of connection, without even trying. We didn't need words. We didn't need explanations. We just needed to be, to exist in the same space, to share moments without fear or hesitation. And that was enough. Later that evening, as we sat together in the quiet of the hostel room, I couldn't help but feel grateful for how far we had come. We weren't rushing. We weren't forcing anything. We were just letting it unfold. And that, in itself, felt like a small miracle. Malik turned to me, a small smile tugging at his lips. "I think I'm starting to understand why you don't talk much," he said, his tone light but meaningful. "You don't need to. You're already saying everything with your actions." And in that moment, I realized that sometimes words aren't necessary. Sometimes the quiet moments, those small, subtle exchanges, are the ones that speak the loudest. And as I looked at Malik, I knew that this connection, this quiet bond between us, was exactly where I needed to be. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't easy, but it was real. And in a world that often feels loud and overwhelming, that was more than enough. Sometimes the best connections are the ones that grow quietly, gently, no rush, no pressure, just two people, finding their way to each other. As the days went by, something inside me began to shift. It wasn't an overnight transformation, and it certainly wasn't the dramatic kind of change you see in the movies. It was subtler, quieter, a kind of unfolding that happened one small moment at a time. But in those moments, something beautiful started to take shape. There was no rushing, no grand gestures or big decisions. Just the quiet, steady realization that I was no longer just moving through life, barely existing, but truly experiencing it, deeply and honestly. And for the first time in a long time, I could feel hope rising in me, not as something distant or impossible, but as something tangible, something real that I could reach for. The uncertainty I'd carried with me for so long began to lift, just a little. Maybe it was Malik's unspoken understanding of me, the way he seemed to know when I needed space and when I needed him close. Or maybe it was the way he didn't push me to figure things out or make decisions before I was ready. Whatever it was, I began to realize that the way we connected, this slow, steady bond that we had built, not through force or expectation but through just being ourselves, was something I hadn't allowed myself to believe in for a long time. And that realization, in and of itself, felt like a new beginning. I started to feel more open, more willing to take chances. Not just with Malik, but with my own heart. I had spent so much time holding back, afraid to let anyone in, afraid of what they might see, of what it would mean if I allowed myself to be seen. But Malik didn't ask for anything from me. He didn't try to make me feel like I needed to change or be something I wasn't. He simply saw me. And in that seeing, I began to see myself in a way I never had before. There was something deeply comforting about that. I think for the first time in my life, I felt understood. Not just accepted, but truly understood, on a level I had never let myself go before. And it made me realize something important. I didn't have to be afraid of my own feelings. I didn't have to hide. I could feel, I could connect, and I could trust that it would be okay. The idea of what came next didn't seem so scary anymore. The future, which had always been something I'd tiptoed around, something I'd tried to control, began to feel open, wide open, like a new road stretching ahead of me, full of possibility. I wasn't sure exactly where that road would take me, but for the first time, I felt ready to take that step forward. I felt ready to see where this new connection with Malik would go, to explore the possibilities of what it could be, without worrying too much about the outcome. Because maybe the beauty of it wasn't in the destination. Maybe it was in the journey itself, the moments of vulnerability, the quiet connection, the way we allowed ourselves to grow alongside each other. And even though I didn't know what would happen tomorrow or the day after, I knew that whatever came next, it would be worth exploring. The fear that had once held me back wasn't gone entirely, but it was lighter. It no longer had such a grip on me, and that in itself felt like freedom. Not the freedom of having all the answers or knowing where life would take me, but the freedom to embrace whatever came my way. The freedom to feel, to experience, and to trust. What Malik had done, what we had shared, had changed me. But not just in the way you might think. It wasn't about falling in love or making some grand life decision. It was about something quieter, more intimate. It was about believing in connection, believing in myself, and most of all, believing in the possibility of something more. It was the realization that I didn't have to navigate life alone, that maybe, just maybe, it was okay to let someone else walk beside me. And that thought? That was both terrifying and thrilling. But it was also exactly what I needed. A new beginning. I realized, in the quiet of those moments, that hope isn't some far-off ideal. It's something you can feel in your bones. It's in the way someone looks at you, the way they listen when you speak, the way they make you feel like you belong just as you are. Hope is in the small, simple things that happen between two people when they stop pretending, stop hiding, and start allowing themselves to be seen for who they truly are. And maybe that's the most powerful thing of all. The ability to be seen, to truly be understood, to embrace the possibility of something real, without needing to know where it will go. Just letting it unfold, step by step. So, while the journey ahead was still uncertain, I felt different. I felt lighter, more open, and more willing to step into the future with Malik, who had unexpectedly become more than just my roommate, but someone I couldn't imagine not having by my side. I don't know where this connection will lead, but I'm ready to find out. One step at a time. Because hope isn't just for the future, It's something we can choose, right here, right now. And in that choice, there's an incredible power. The power to embrace what's to come, without fear, without hesitation. Just trust in the possibility of what's ahead. As I sit here reflecting on everything that's happened, I can't help but think about how unpredictable life can be. We walk around thinking we have it all figured out, believing we know exactly where we're headed. But sometimes, just sometimes, the universe throws us a curveball. It takes us by surprise, showing us sides of ourselves we didn't know existed, and in some cases, opening doors to new connections that change everything. That's exactly what happened with Malik. What started as a forced, uncomfortable pairing, roommates on a college trip, turned into something I didn't expect. At first, I was certain it was going to be a nightmare. I thought I'd be stuck with someone I didn't understand, someone whose personality seemed to clash with mine at every turn. But what I didn't realize was that life wasn't trying to punish me by placing Malik in my path. It was pushing me to grow, to see things differently, to challenge my assumptions about connection and about myself. What began with uncertainty, awkwardness, and hesitation grew into something far deeper than I could have imagined. I didn't expect to feel the way I did about Malik, or anyone, really. I didn't expect to let down my guard, to feel vulnerable, or to learn how to trust again, but here we are. I found myself letting go of old fears, allowing someone in, and discovering that the kind of connection we shared was more than just physical. It was something real. Something meaningful. What I've learned through this whole journey is that we often hold ourselves back from real connections because we're afraid. Afraid of being hurt, afraid of being vulnerable, afraid of stepping into the unknown. We spend so much time hiding pieces of ourselves, locking them away because we think we need to be perfect, or because we're scared of what others might think. But here's the truth. We're all human. We all have our flaws, our insecurities, our moments of doubt. But it's those very things that make us real, that make us worth connecting with. And sometimes all it takes is one person to look at us with kindness and understanding to help us see ourselves for who we truly are. The journey with Malik wasn't just about him and me. It was about me learning to see myself in a way I hadn't before. It was about me understanding that vulnerability doesn't make us weak. It makes us strong. It's about the courage to be open, to let others in, and to trust that, even when things get complicated, it's worth it. Because in the end, the connections we form, whether they're with a roommate, a friend, or someone more, are what make life worth living. They give us hope. They remind us that we're not alone. They help us grow. So what's next for me and Malik? I don't know. But what I do know is that we're taking it one step at a time. No pressure, no expectations. Just two people willing to see where this journey takes them. And honestly, that's all we really need. Because sometimes, it's not about the destination. It's about the people you meet along the way, and the moments you share that shape you into someone new. The moments that make you realize you're capable of more than you thought. I don't have all the answers, and I'm not sure where this will go, but that's okay. Not everything has to be figured out right now. Life doesn't work that way. What matters is that I'm here, open, and willing to see what comes next. And I hope you are too. Because the future is full of possibilities, and if we're open to them, they can surprise us in ways we never imagined. Now, if you've been following this journey, if you've felt connected to my story, I want to hear from you. I want to know your thoughts. Have you ever been afraid to open up, to connect with someone because of your own fears or insecurities? Have you had a moment like mine where you realized you were capable of more than you ever thought possible? Share your story with me in the comments below. Let's continue this conversation, because we all need to hear that we're not alone, that we're all on this journey together, trying to make sense of it all, learning and growing along the way. And if you found something in this story that resonated with you, if it made you rethink how you connect with others or how you view yourself, then do me a favor. Hit that like button, subscribe, and share this video with someone who might need to hear this too. Let's build a community of support, encouragement, and growth. I believe that when we open ourselves up to real connections, we can make the world a little brighter, a little kinder. So, don't forget to subscribe, because the story doesn't end here. There's always more to discover, more to learn, and more to experience. Thanks for being here, for listening, for being open to this journey with me. I can't wait to see where it takes us next. Until next time, take care and keep believing in the possibilities.